Right. God's minute, author unknown. I have only just a minute, only 60 seconds in it, forced upon me, can't refuse it, didn't seek it, didn't choose it, but it's up to me to use it. Give account if I abuse it, I must suffer if I lose it. Just a tiny little minute, but an eternity is in it. Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays, President Emeritus of Morehouse College, was a mentor of a student back in the day. You may have heard of Martin Luther King Jr. He made that poem famous, and I start with it to assure you that I'll only be a few minutes. I won't take too much of your time, but I'm very honored to have this moment, this minute. Thank you to Ye, Karen, and Stefan for this opportunity. I'd like to start us today with the late Dr. Enviro Maathai. She tells this proverb from Japan about the hummingbird. And I want her, in her own words, to share it with you so you can just get a piece of her essence. I so admire her, and I call her, as you know, the late Dr. Maathai because she's passed away. But can you all help me from, why do we call people that pass away late? I mean, here you could have been an educator, worked all your life to be proud, and she was an educator par excellence. She was the first African woman to receive a doctorate from Central and East Africa. She'll show that one. And I had to show this slide because growing up in school, I always thought of Africa as a country. I had no concept of a continent, so that gives you some breadth and width of just how big a space we're talking about. So here's this educator par excellence, and we're calling her the late. As educators, we show up not just on time, we're early because we want our students to be well prepared for, and then we pass away and they call us late. Late for what? Eternity? Eternity has no time, so that doesn't make any sense. But I digress. Let's hear Dr. Enviro Maathai in her own words.
We are constantly being bombarded by problems that we face, and sometimes we can get completely overwhelmed. The story of the hummingbird is about this huge forest being consumed by a fire. All the animals in the forest come up, and they are transfixed as they watch the forest burning, and they feel very overwhelmed, very powerless. Except this little hummingbird. It says, I'm going to do something about the fire. So it flies to the nearest stream, takes a drop of water, puts it on the fire, and goes up and down, up and down, up and down, as fast as it can. In the meantime, all the other animals, much bigger animals, like the elephant with a big trunk, to bring much more water, they are standing there helpless. And they are saying to the hummingbird, what do you think you can do? You're too little. This fire is too big. Your wings are too little. And your beak so small. You can only bring a small drop of water at a time. But as they continue to discourage it, it turns to them without wasting any time and tells them, I'm doing the best I can. And that to me is what all of us should do. We should always feel like a hummingbird. I may feel insignificant, but I certainly don't want to be like the animals watching that goes down the drain. I will be a hummingbird. I will do the best I can.
So on September 26, 2011, I'll never forget, that's my birthday actually, Enviro Maathai passed away, and she passed away unbowed and empty. Unbowed is the title of her memoir, and I say empty because she was born with the potential of a wide, vast forest with millions of trees inside of her. And before she passed away, she made sure, like the little hummingbird, that she, one tree at a time, empowered other women in her area, like herself, to plant those trees. This quote from Dr. Maathai was shared when she gave her Nobel address, and I think it's very important for you to see today. Today we are met with a challenge that calls for a shift in our thinking so that humanity stops threatening its life support system. How strategic and how important are those words for us today? When Gary shifted the thinking of many before she passed away, she empowered Indigenous women, particularly to plant 50 million trees. She became the first African woman to win a Nobel Prize for her work with these women who she taught to combat deforestation and famine that was threatening their life support system in the villages of Kenya. She was told that this could not be done. She was met with opposition, even violent opposition at times. But she would not be bowed by traditional mores and unsubstantiated claims that women could not plant trees without being licensed foresters. She said, that's ridiculous, and she taught the women to plant the trees anyway to combat the erosion, which caused deforestation. And by that, she stemmed the tide of erosion, which then allowed people to plant crops, which then stemmed the tide of the famine, which was threatening their life support system. When Uhuru National Park in Kenya was threatened by urban development, she and civil rights leaders took up a peaceful, nonviolent protest, and they were met with opposition. They were beaten in jail, but she remained unbowed, determined to protect the basic rights of clean air and clean water, things that each of us are entitled to. And the water is filtered through these trees, and the air is also purified through these trees. They prevailed, and Uhuru National Park was sustained. I was able to, as you heard in my bio, adopt the 26-acre urban forest right here in the heart of Atlanta. And at the time when this opportunity was presented to me, I had this existential crisis. Just a big term that Southern Grannies say, boy, you crazy as a Betsy bug. And Betsy bug educators is an actual bug. It's the horned beetle. I don't know the Latin term, look it up. So anyway, here I am from the south side of Chicago talking about adopting a forest. For people from where I come from, if I said I was adopting a forest, they're like, you adopted a what? You know, it's just people that look like me, they didn't do adopting forests. But you know, I had this opportunity posed to me, and it made me question, can I do this? After all, we came from the place where you had people like the Reverend Jesse Jackson, civil rights leader, first black man to run for president. We had Mayor Harold Washington, the first black mayor of the city of Atlanta, of the city of Chicago, another civil rights leader. We had Michelle Obama, aka forever First Lady, and many of us know her story. If you don't, read Becoming. Great story there. When she planted that garden on the lawn of the White House, we were like, go lady, no. But here I was now being challenged with, what are you going to do with this minute that you have? And I was in a bit of a struggle. I hadn't quite determined exactly how I was going to measure up. My father had moved us in Chicago trying to avoid some of that violence, because that was the issues that really pressed in Chicago. You still hear it in the news today. Too many black boys and youth that look like my son here are being gunned down. But there is another narrative. You may not have heard of Urban Prep Academy in Chicago, which each year graduates 300 young men that are college bound. So we have to balance that story out, especially for our young people that are impressionable. But anyway, the majority of the narrative is also what it is, and that's violence. So my father thought, you know, well, we'll move away from that violence. We stayed on the south side, but we moved 2 blocks west of Weston, which was the white neighborhood. And then there, I experienced racial violence. I was the only black kid in this pool that had been totally segregated until I got there. And one little guy who wanted to show his racism pool they injected from the pool, then he lashed out and violence against me. So it seemed like you just can't escape this racism thing. So you can't escape this violence issue. So here I was being challenged with adopting a forest, and the question was, can I afford to do this? Am I being true to the cause, so to speak? And I realized when I heard Dr. Maathai's story that the cause was greater than just any one thing, that it definitely included things like clean air and clean water. As I mentioned, trees clean our air and they filter our water. Fundamental human rights, all are entitled to. But if you cut down all the trees and you pollute the rivers like our own South River, most wanted for a polluted and endangered river, well then you take away those civil and human rights. When you do these things, and disproportionately in BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, well then you have taken away the basic civil rights of clean air and clean water. And we gotta do something about that. There's also this wealth bias. That was a challenge I had as well. The bias is when you see people doing this kind of work, they come from wealthy families. I didn't come from a wealthy family. Or they know people that have the wealth, they have access to the power. But I did have one thing, and that was my faith. And my faith is what caused me to dive into AmeriCorps. A couple years after I graduated from college, AmeriCorps was paying minimum wage, however, and that's not quite quite the economics that we're taught in college after you graduated from a top-rated HBCU to go into a minimum wage position. But there was this clarion call to be engaged, to do something. And AmeriCorps was the stateside version of the Peace Corps. I actually originally wanted to go to the Peace Corps. I was prepared to go to Africa and do this kind of work, but we needed those kind of service workers right here in the United States. So I answered the call, and I dove in head first as a man of faith. Didn't really know what I was getting into, but it was a good thing. When I started with Morehouse to do AmeriCorps, we were starting an Office of Community Service. And we designed this ropes course at the Outdoor Activity Center, which a decade later had become abandoned because post-September 11th, philanthropic organizations, their purse strings, they began to draw them in. And large nonprofits like the United Way, they went on life support. And then small nonprofits like the one that ran the Outdoor Activity Center, they simply flatlined and totally disappeared. They totally went away. So here I was coming to this opportunity, and I was like, what can we do? Regardless of color, regardless of class. And we started to open this facility and to run it with people like EEA in Georgia. They came alongside and was the wind beneath my wings. I realized that in AmeriCorps we had a mantra, the power of one. And at this moment, I was that one. But not the one that you may think of as a solo or a maverick or someone who's doing it on their own, but the one that is stamped on every U.S. coin, e pluribus unum. Out of diversity, there comes one. Out of unity, there's one. So here I am with just a lot of faith and then a lot of people that came alongside to help me. So as I mentioned, Georgia EEA came alongside. We had the Urban and Community Forestry Foundation, which gave us funding. Initially, I had applied for that funding to hire an arborist to do a sample census of the trees so we could show people how valid and important an urban forest is. But after we didn't get any other funding, I took a page from Dr. Maathai's playbook, and I went back to the Urban and Community Forestry Foundation and asked them, can we use volunteers? There are studies that show there's a statistical validity to volunteers once they're instructed to do this census of trees. They thought it was a wonderful idea. So for the first time in the real world, many of us used pie because we had to use these old sewing tapes to go around the tree to get the diameter breast height. I did not mention this slide right here is actually, Dr. Maathai came to Morehouse and she planted this tree. So here I have the Nobel hometown hero, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. story, and then the Nobel laureate, Dr. Maathai coming here, and that's a little placard in the weeping willow tree that she planted. And it made me think more introspectively, here's a convergence of two Nobel laureates, but they came at their work from different perspectives. Dr. King came from the civil rights perspective. Dr. Maathai came from the environmental justice perspective. And it's that inspiration that led me to know, yes, this is the right thing to do at the right time in the right season. And this is the slide where you see the students. So here we are taking these old sewing tapes. We didn't have diameter tapes, so we took these old sewing measuring tapes around the tree. And that's what you call DBA, diameter at breast height, to measure just how strong and the size of the tree. And from that, we were able to really make this a community effort with many hands. Hands on Atlanta gave us supporters. Governor Sonny Perdue gave us interns from Georgia State. Mayor Shirley Franklin provided interns from Emory University, my own HBCU network. Clark Atlanta, Morehouse, and Spelman provided interns as well. I interned Lauren Grant, who's on her way to Georgia Tech. I'm so happy for her, who is with us today. And in conclusion, I'd like to show you what we were able to do. Next slide, please. So, before you push play. So here I am substituting in a class, and I'm giving it my blood, my sweat, my tears, chunks of my heart tossed in for good measure. I'm using this book that I found in a gym class by author Squire Reschnell called When God Winks at You. And he calls these little things God winks. So I'm teaching this English class, creative writing, from this book, which is a great little book about people's stories, really inspirational stories, another good thing to put on your summer read list. And I get this email for people that are grassroots, people in their communities doing great things. The Oprah Winfrey Network wants to highlight those people. P&G wants to come alongside and make a commercial series called Future Friendly. And I was like, this is really strange. I didn't even watch Oprah Winfrey. I didn't have the cable to watch it at the time. But I applied, and they selected our story, and this is that commercial.
Behind the scenes of the Oprah Winfrey Show, hard work is just part of the job. Every decision the producers make has a big impact on the show.
No, this is the key. Take it out.
Just like small acts in your life can have a meaningful impact on the planet. And now, Home and P&G's Future Friendly are going behind the scenes, introducing people who are making a difference in their communities and to the planet, one small act at a time. Little acts, meaningful impact. Presented by P&G's Future Friendly.
Those are the Canadian Keys. My name is Brendan Barclay. I run a nonprofit, Sustaining Urban Villages. We focus on the mission to sustain this urban green space. My passion for the environment started in 7th grade. I wrote a poem about being a naturalist. It just flowed. This is what I want to do. I can go and do it. This was the first project of Sustaining Urban Villages, 26-acre urban forest in the heart of Atlanta, very easy to become urbanized, cut down all the trees, put office building. This is an example of total deforestation in an urban environment. We call it the heat island effect. These unnatural surfaces, they're going to retain their heat. It's going to take longer for them to cool down, which then means we use more energy. Trees provide for us major functions. They filter the water, and they provide us energy reduction costs through summertime shade and wintertime breaking up the cold months. If you have trees around your home, preserve those trees. Look at ways to trim them rather than just cutting them down. We want to keep these trees actually alive.
Brendan's at SUV, he works with these volunteers to teach them not only the value of volunteering, but also the issues around environmental education and conservation.
I enjoy teaching kids about the environment. I see it as my responsibility to make sure that students, adults, have an understanding of how each of us can do our part in sustaining the environment.
And everyone does good things, we all together will make a part of it.
The small acts that I'm able to do to conserve urban green space in the city of Atlanta is really making a huge impact.
You can help keep
So this helped me to experience university. I had been to university, but university comes from unity and diversity together. And I had experienced university as a result of adopting this urban forest. And I was very thankful for this opportunity. But after that, I felt like, that's the Midas touch. A lot of different things going to happen. So I went back to subbing for another couple of years in the classroom. And they said, well, why would you do that? Because that's what we do as educators. That's where our heart is. I did it based on my faith. Others do it on conviction. But all of us do it because we hope for our children that we can have the basic human rights of clean air and clean water, that they will pick up that cause and champion that cause for a whole other generation of people so that we can continue to survive and not threaten our own life support system. And in conclusion today, one of my book mentors, the Admiral Barry C. Black, who is currently the U.S. Admiral, I said Admiral, that is the Naval Admiral. He is currently the chaplain for the United States Senate. He was the first African-American man to be the chaplain of the United States Senate. And in his book, he talked about from the hood to the hill, sharing song even as a public speaker. And I started to do that with my work with students, and they were so touched by it. It's amazing how it transcended even some of the times you're speaking, just to conclude that way. So I talked about the wind beneath my wings being the EA. There's also that wing and a prayer, and this is my view. The Lord bless you and keep you. Make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn His face toward you and give